Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, stories, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out the articles, videos, and more at passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, join the community forum, and of course, attend the weekly online Global Passive House Happy Hour. Now, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the Passive House podcast. How are you doing, Zach?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's beautiful in Seattle. No complaints.
It's beautiful here in Auckland in New Zealand too. We're definitely warming up. Of course, we are in those shoulder seasons right now, so things are getting warm over this side of the world while they're cooling down for you. But I think everyone's looking forward to the end of 2020.
That's right, definitely.
All right, hey, well let's jump into this week's episode. I'm pretty excited to hear from Kimberly Llewellyn. Do you want to give us a quick intro?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a great conversation with her, and Kimberly is an engineer and is also the performance construction technical lead at Mitsubishi Electric Trane HVAC US, which is incidentally a founding sponsor of Passive House Accelerator. And she talks about her engineering background a little bit, also about her really formative experience at Positive Energy, where she did a bunch of field work that I think really grounded her, kind of balanced her formal education. And she also did lots of collaboration and learning with Christoph Irwin, who's a friend and leader in the Passive House world here in the U.S. So after some time at Positive Energy, she pivoted to Mitsubishi Electric and made that move via her connection with Chad Gillespie there, who's another kind of like-minded professional who's both of them are really committed to improving the way that we're building when we're conditioning buildings and thinking about how buildings are part of lots of solution making, including solutions around climate change. So she has a really interesting perspective that I think is different from the interviewees that we've talked with before, because she's working at a manufacturer. And so she's looking at the interplay between demand for mechanical equipment by the passive house industry and the drive to produce passive house friendly mechanical equipment at Mitsubishi. So she's at this nexus point there, and working to help accelerate a positive feedback loop where we see, mechanical equipment that makes passive house easier to accomplish and therefore drives more demand and becomes a virtuous cycle. So she's an engineer, an educator, an instigator of change, and I hope you enjoy the interview. Well, welcome, Kimberly, to the Passive House podcast. I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today. And I'm hoping that you could start with sharing your story a little bit about how you discovered Passive House and what drew you to this community.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, Zach. I'm excited
Absolutely.
to talk to you too. I love the accelerator, and I love the philosophy and the intention behind it. So
thank you.
Really happy to be here. Okay. I found Passive House, I don't even remember how many years ago. It was at their national conference in Pittsburgh. It must have been 7 or 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I was working for a company called Positive Energy. We started out just doing energy ratings and inspections, and ended up doing full-blown mechanical designs by the time I left. But for a while, we were kind of the only outfit doing building science forensics in the Austin area. So the owners of that company, Christoph Irwin and Diane, they were really influential, I think, in my early exposure to not just to building science, but maybe to the construction industry at large. So I could have gone from engineering school and straight into some form of design or desk work. But because they had taken a rather circuitous life path themselves in terms of, Christoph was a research engineer for many years and scrapped it all for when he and Diane started their own green building company in Austin. And from that, positive energy was, born or created. And so if they hadn't been there, if I hadn't met them at that juncture in my life when I was just really entering the construction field, I may not have had what I consider to be my most valuable education, which was my field education. So I spent years crawling around houses and, crawl spaces and hanging from rafters in attics, doing energy ratings and looking for leaks, finding moisture sources. And it gave me not just a deep appreciation for the work that our field and trade people do, but also a visceral sense about, in terms of building physics, so that when I look at something on paper, I can see and understand the formulas, but I also can kind of feel it in my bones. Mm-hmm. And so having come from that very, I'd say, like, balanced in terms of like reality and theory perspective from positive energy, when I was introduced to the passive house, it was FIAS that I originally got introduced to the FIAS standard. It was like, a kid in a candy shop, my version of that. Because I found a group of people who were equally concerned with what is going on a larger scale with our environment and our climate change, and wanted to do something about that within the context of our built environment. And there was a very diverse community of people doing the work, like the builders, and also a lot of really highly theoretical people who are focusing on the woofy part of it. And so I've never left since that initial introduction. It was also the first time I met Betsy Pettit and Joe Stebrick, and they became part of my my backdrop, my landscape, part of my clan.
Yeah, absolutely. And how long were you at Positive Energy?
I was there something like 5 years. I went back and tried to put the exact dates to it, but yeah, about 5 years.
Right. And then you made the shift to Mitsubishi Electric Trane HVAC US.
Yes.
And what motivated that move, and what's your role there? Tell me about that.
Sure. So the common theme for the movements in my life actually tends to be following and connecting with the community that I resonate most with. So that was what drew me to the Passive House community. And I will say that I have found like a similar affinity with the PHI community. So I want to make sure to say that it just came a little bit later for me. But so my move to Mitsubishi was no different than that. I'd say I had a desire to have a broader reach in the community. And, I've lived different places in the world, and I've lived all over the place, all over the U.S. And I have a sort of natural bent to want to reach broadly. And so that was sort of some of my, like, the itch that caused me to look for other opportunities. But what really pulled me into Mitsubishi was another person who was like-minded, and that was Chad Gillespie, who was, heading up and the creator of our performance construction team at Mitsubishi. So also very like-minded in terms of understanding that we needed to do better with our built environment, and that in terms of energy efficiency and health, that HVAC was absolutely crucial, and that we wanted to do that, address that piece of the puzzle. So I made that move to Mitsubishi about 4.5 years ago. And it has been a wacky ride. I did end up traveling a lot, and I have ended up, finding myself in national sort of arenas and forums with other like-minded people working towards a similar goal. And since I started, I've always been focusing on, training of the fundamentals of HVAC. So I think that as an industry, somehow we've just, I don't know if we were ever there. I have a friend who accuses me of romanticizing the past. So I'm not going to say that, oh, we used to know all of this and we've just forgotten it or gotten lazy. I should be careful not to say that. But HVAC is so absolutely critical to the well-being, to our well-being. And yet even, practicing professionals, I think, can be a little awfully fuzzy on the fundamentals. So, so from the get-go, I've focused on talking about the fundamentals of HVAC and building physics. But then my specialty is really with the passive house and high performance building sector. And so focusing on what the HVAC requirements and needs are for those types of buildings.
So you have a unique perspective, because you've spent time as a practitioner, and now you've moved into this new space, doing development and education with Mitsubishi Electric. And we in the community here, the Passive House community, hear from practitioners a lot, I think, and we hear practitioner stories a lot. So I'm excited that we get to hear your story. But I'm curious about how that shift has changed kind of how you see this, how you see things.
Yeah. Thanks for that question, Zach. So, I mentioned when we were talking earlier, before we started recording, about how I'm really, I guess, dedicated or just wired to this idea of there being a big problem in a broad community, with different entities bringing their best skill set to the game in order to solve that big problem. Okay. And so when I was in the field for a number of years and then doing mechanical designs for a number of years, I found myself in this position in relationship to manufacturers of an adversarial almost, like, you darn manufacturers, we need this product. We've been saying it for years. We need it. You can't do it. Where is it?
Right.
And, I like to think that I had like a sensibility that, like, well, there's got to be a reason, right? There's got to be a reason. And I can shout at the cruise ship, that are these big corporations all I want. Like, I don't know if it's ever going to do anything, So that was another part about what motivated me to want to move to a manufacturer, to see it, like, get inside the machine, like see what is this process about, and why can't we get the products to market that we really need to meet these, like passive house projects, and is there anything I can do to help that process, and so that was a major motivator for me as well, to want to make that shift. And so I've never lost my perspective or my appreciation for the field and for the designers and what their concerns are. But you do have this other layer of well, now I see some of the challenges that exist within the machine, and I do feel like I'm working to improve some of those internal processes.
One of the things I think that draws a lot of us, or is a source of sort of motivation and inspiration for a lot of us in the Passive House community, is this notion that through innovation we can help drive this transition that we know needs to happen in buildings. And so I'm curious to hear in the HVAC, as you look at where the building industry is today in North America and where we know it needs to go, where do you see the kind of most important challenges / opportunities for innovation in HVAC to help move that along? Like, what's holding us back right now, and what needs to change to really get things moving to do the next step jump?
The U.S. market's demand for advanced HVAC equipment has not been consistent and uniform enough in its product requests to actually result in us getting those products, because
right.
The request has been a little bit broad and inconsistent.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, from a product development and innovation standpoint, that's where I see a real opportunity that the passive house sector represents, because the program dictates certain requirements for indoor air quality and for expectations for health and comfort. But additionally, as you know, these spaces, built to passive house standards, whether we're talking single family or multifamily, if they're actually built to the standards, you can take that, a given house layout, and you can put it in many different climate zones across the country and end up with essentially, a much tighter capacity range that's required for a given layout. And so what that means to me is it starts helping us narrow the specification range and simplifying the product requests that we're making of our factories and engineers. So that's a real opportunity in terms of product development.
I mean, we are seeing exponential, admittedly from smallish numbers, but exponential growth in passive house. So I think the landscape is changing quickly, but it sounds like there's a combination of there needs to be more demand, and also you're doing thinking to help clarify for your company what range that demand is going to be coming in, right? Is that way understanding correctly?
Right. Yes. I'm trying to help our teams understand where, if to simplify our product specification requests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You and Chad Gillespie and Dan McCollum did a passive house component spotlight with the accelerator a few months ago. It was really excellent. And you were focused on some components that are really appropriate, particularly for multifamily projects and passive house projects. So could you share a little bit about those components with the audience, and any, I don't know if there are any updates since our conversation with you a few months ago, but it was really interesting. So I'd love to share it here.
In the case of one of the products that we talked about, the QAHV, which is a CO2 refrigerant-based domestic hot water system, that is will be a new product brought to market, and it's I think that our listening community understands the positive implications of having CO2 as a refrigerant for a domestic hot water system. But
and I would just to interject, I mean, I think that I think you're right that most of our listeners understand that. And for those who aren't aware, the refrigerant, the impact of global warming from refrigerants is something that is gaining lots of attention because it can be potentially really huge. So we know that we really need to drive that down, and CO2 is a great answer because it has a global warming potential of 1 instead of hundreds
or thousands.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. So, when you had asked before, like, what are some of the barriers to innovation or to progress in the HVAC sector? One thing I could have answered is that manufacturers are not necessarily thinking holistically enough about the product offerings. In other words, they're, well, I've got a heat pump, but I'm leaving it up to engineers and field installations to supply components that may be necessary to the overall system. And that is something that we are doing differently with this QAHV system, where Mitsubishi will be supplying the entire kit of parts. So we're taking that potential variability out of the design and installation parts of the process, which essentially results in quality control. It's a little bit like the movement that we're seeing towards modular building, and for all the same reasons that offsite or modular building has a lot of advantages, the same holds true for HVAC and now domestic hot water systems.
Right. That's a really interesting parallel. So what is it about the system that makes it so well suited for multifamily passive house projects?
Well, besides the low, extremely low GWP refrigerant, they're also highly efficient. So we have the system when it's operating, and domestic hot water systems are generally not operating constantly, but when it's operating, we're operating at COPs near to 4. And so there are a number of other advantages, which I feel like it'd be better to revisit and with some visuals perhaps, but the efficiency of operation and the quality control of design and installation, I think, are the main sellers.
Yeah. So can you, I know most of our listeners probably know COP, but a coefficient of performance, but can you explain, what does that mean? It's to somebody who's new to that concept. I mean, this is one of the things that's kind of incredible about heat pumps.
Right. Well, it's a little bit, like magic, but, taking, so the simplest way to explain it is that for every 1 unit of energy used, you get an equivalent of 2, 3, or 4 out, if the COP is 2, 3, or 4, for example. So that sounds like magic, but we're moving energy around in different ways and taking advantage of processes that allow allow
Right.
us to do that.
Right. Harnessing phase change
Mm-hmm.
for, yeah. Okay. Awesome. Thank you. It is magic. And it's definitely one of those things that is one of those technologies that is really encouraging in terms of our ability to deliver on this transition. So,
Right. And
yeah.
like, just so our listeners know, we're smiling when we say it's magic. It's not really magic. It's physics, chemistry.
It's science.
It's thermodynamics. It's science.
Exactly.
But it looks like magic when you just say it like that. You get 4 for 1. It's amazing. Don't ask any questions.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. So, what else? What's getting you up in the morning? What else about your work?
Oh gosh, there are lots of things. Again, like a lot of times what gets me up in the morning is working with people I really like working with, and having the opportunity to connect outside of the company with other people that I really like working with, like you, and
Right back at
a
you.
lot of our partners. I really do think that's what makes my world go around, is having a common goal and having feeling myself to be part of a team that's working towards that common goal. So I also feel I feel the heat,
Mm-hmm.
figuratively and literally,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of, I'm really concerned with the impact that we're having on our climate, and I want to do what I can to positively, hopefully, implement some change there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's just the creative aspect to product development that's really rewarding. We need to think outside of the box, and we need to look to push the edges, the walls of that box, so that we're not just trying to scramble to meet an immediate need, but so that we're like in earnest finding ourselves in step with the early adopters and the market leaders and innovators like the Passive House community. So
yeah, and you're feeling, and you have that space at Mitsubishi. It sounds like to
I am
do that work.
Extraordinarily grateful that I am encouraged to engage the larger community in that way. I have absolute clarity around the value that brings back to Mitsubishi. And I am extraordinarily grateful that I am empowered to engage in this kind of activity, and the trainings that sometimes I was giving IAQ and ventilation trainings 4 years ago, before Mitsubishi was ever really even thinking about IAQ for the US market. But now, 4 years later, we're very much thinking about that, and we've laid some foundation internally to build upon. And had I not been given some leeway to do something that may not have had an obvious immediate value, it has come to fruition. And so that's a big thanks and shout out to Chad, who always sort of saw the value in that.
That's awesome. Well, I'm really happy for you. I'm also happy for the community of practitioners who get to benefit from that work. So thank you.
And that was Kimberly Llewellyn, who is Performance Construction Manager at Mitsubishi Electric Cooling and Heating. Thanks for that interview, Zach. I took out a few points for that. Now, I also work for a product supplier in my day job, and that was one of the things you talked about in the intro, is that Kimberly's working for a manufacturer. And I think one of the things that really stands out for me is, I'm probably biased here, But manufacturers, product suppliers can be good. They help. They help
Oh yeah.
designers. We can't build houses without product suppliers. But more than just supplying products, I can definitely relate to all the training that Kimberly talked about. Not just about her products and the products of Mitsubishi, but the fundamentals of the area that they work in. And this is the same for me with ProClimate. I don't spend much time talking about ProClimate. I spend a lot of time talking about air tightness and healthy indoor environments. And I know the guys that at 475 do the same. And I think there's a lot of really great product suppliers out there who work in this space, and a lot of their time is spent educating designers, specifiers, but also educating the market.
Absolutely. And that brings me, I think, back to an episode a couple of weeks ago with Bronwyn Berry, right, where she was talking about her background, her time
selling windows,
and
true.
the fact that she was going to architects' offices and really educating them on Passive House and what Passive House is about, and the importance of how all these different elements fit together in this holistic solution, and that high performance windows are a key player in that. And so you can't really achieve Passive House if any of these key elements is missing.
That's right. She said she spent most of her time talking about Passive House, and then just the last 5 minutes talking about windows, and the last tiny bit of that talking about her windows.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And I suspect that Kimberly would say something very similar. And that we become, I think, each of us who's involved in this movement, this Passive House movement, in our own different ways, each of us becomes an ambassador for science-based design in buildings, and having this holistic approach. So
Kimberly also talked about community, and that was one of the things, and the people was involved with some of the people that drew her to Mitsubishi. And I'd have to say that going to anywhere from somewhere like Positive Energy says a lot for that company, because I mean the team at Positive Energy are fantastic.
Yeah,
so
they are.
And she mentioned Christoph. We've talked about we'll have to get Christoph on the show. And a side note, if you don't subscribe to his podcast, I would definitely recommend checking that out as well. Positive Energy podcast. And she also mentioned Joe Seabrook, who a lot of people will know as one of the modern fathers of building science. And it's just, I find it quite nice to join these dots up of people who are in our community of building science and high performance building, that have these direct connections with such revered people, but also they're really accessible, these people, and we're just, I feel privileged that they are all part of our community.
Yeah, that's very true. And I mean, Joe Seabrook is famous for the community building that he does. I don't think he probably would put it in those terms, but
he'd say he's famous for barbecues, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and libations around building science. But there, the building science, the summer camp is a famous spot where all these folks are connecting and spreading the word, and I think more importantly, probably even than the word, is spreading the rigor around building science. That we can proselytize about the benefits of Passive House, but we need to be grounded in the science, so that we're delivering. We're making sure that we're creating great buildings.
And also the reasons why, and I know I've heard Joe's talk about that, but also I get the sense that most of us who are involved in this aren't just doing it for the love of the science, but also for the greater good and the benefit that we know that good buildings can provide to people, but also to our planet. A final thought from me, just regarding the science of heat pumps. I was reminded towards the end of the conversation there about the great quote from Arthur C. Clarke, who said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think heat pumps and heat pump technology, it ticks that box. It seems magic in the way that it somehow heats up stuff from nowhere when it's really, really cold outside, and can then turn around and do the exact opposite in the summertime and seemingly cool down a space by magic with the coefficient of performance you talked about of these ridiculous numbers. But it is science, and I do encourage people to. We'll find some links. But if you look up the Carnot cycle, that's Carnot, the French spelling, that gives you a bit of a clue. Have a look at some YouTube videos. Look up the Carnot or the heat engine, and that'll just give you a little bit of an insight into the science behind how this stuff actually works. And it's not the stuff of wizardry, but it is really cool science.
It is cool science. I was introduced to the whole concept of the power of phase change from a friend of mine, Brad Lilliaquist, who at the time was at the International Living Future Institute. And he introduced, when he talked about heat pumps, he introduced it in terms of waterfalls, because we experience because phase change is the reason that it's cool, the air is cool near waterfalls.
Yep.
It's as water falls down a waterfall, the bonds break. There's a physical, through physics, the bonds kind of separate with the molecules, and that process requires heat. So that sucks heat in. It's a chemical process that sucks heat into that process, and therefore is cooling the air around it. So it's that change from water to vapor that is doing that, and so heat pumps are changing a liquid into a gas and then going back from gas to a liquid. And when it does that, you're able to grab heat or grab cool. So that was a very kind of like experiential way, introduction to the magic. So the so-called magic behind heat pumps for me.
Yeah, and I always think about it whenever I'm on the side of the road fixing a puncture in my bike, and I'm pumping air into the tire and realizing, well, first of all, if you have to deflate a highly inflated tire which is under pressure, anyone who's done that will know that the valve gets really, really cold, and that's an example of going from compression to expansion and how you cool something down that was previously at ambient temperature. And the converse is true when you're re-pumping that tire up. You're taking air at ambient temperature, and just by squeezing it, you're dramatically increasing the temperature. And anyone who's felt a bike pump after vigorously pumping up their tires will have felt that sensation of a really hot pump.
Absolutely.
And that's you're seeing at least half of the cycle occurring during that process. But it is worth checking out, and I encourage designers and architects to have a look at some of that stuff, because it's worth at least having some of the, as Kimberly would say, some of the fundamental understanding of that, but also just the wider context of indoor air quality and how things like heating, ventilation, air conditioning is so important to that indoor air quality. And it's also highly relevant to passive house. And I think that's something that as designers and passive house consultants, we shouldn't be scared of putting some of this mechanical equipment into our passive buildings. We do need them. It might mean that we don't need a massive unit. We just need a smaller one, but you still need the ability to control the temperature and also potentially the relative humidity inside a passive building.
So this Wednesday, our Global Passive House Happy Hour will feature Jesse Thompson, who's an architect based in Maine. And he's going to be talking about his approach to affordable housing, passive house in the state of Maine, and particularly his work to commoditize building enclosures and standardized building enclosures in order to drive costs down. So this will be a great follow-on to last week's Passive House Maine Fall Forum, and it should be really interesting for those who are particularly interested in social housing and affordable housing in Passive House. Then on Thursday, October 29th, we're going to be having Passive House Accelerator's third Passive House Component Spotlight. And this will feature Hugh Wariski, who is the founder and technical director at Partel. And he's going to be talking about the Vera system, the smart technical system for airtight buildings. And this is going to be a building science focused presentation. It's patterned after the happy hour. So it's going to be 15, 20 minutes of fast and factual presentation, followed by a very lively Q&A. So don't miss it. It should be really interesting. Also this week, we've got FIAS doing its series of Hootenannies. And this is in place of what would have been its physical conference, its physical fall conference. They're taking one of the most popular pieces of the conference, which is the Hootenannies, and presenting them virtually online Monday through Thursday, and then concluding with a party and award ceremony for their design awards on Friday. And so there will be essentially a roundtable focused on a group of contractors, another roundtable with architects, another with policymakers. So check out FIAS's website for details. I'll also have a link, but this is definitely a don't miss kind of event. And you can access it from around the world. And then in November, Passive House Trust will present its UK Passive House Conference 2020. And this will be going on every Wednesday afternoon throughout November. So another great resource. And then later in December, we'll have a conference from Passive House Canada. So a lot going on and a lot to look forward to.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And a lot of those websites as well are just really worth checking out, even if you've missed those events, if you're listening to this sometime in the future. Things like the Passive House Trust, they've got heaps of really good resources there. So, get on those websites, make use of the resources, and maybe get on their email lists as well. Speaking of email, as I said before, if you do have any comments or feedback or suggestions for future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, podcast@passivehouseaccelerator.com. Make sure you subscribe to us and share this content with others. And also be sure to follow the Accelerator on all the social channels as well, and look out for content. We've got some really great content going up on YouTube. So, check that all out. There's lots and lots of stuff to get in and stay involved and stay connected with the community. Hey, thanks a lot, Zach, for another good episode. And
thank you, Matthew.
We've got some good interviews lined up. So we'll be back again next week for the Passive House podcast.
The Passive House podcast and all of the programs of Passive House Accelerator are made possible by generous support from our sponsors. So I want to say thank you to them. Our founding sponsors are Baxter Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Trane HVAC US, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. And our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority. Thank you.